Hello, Accounting Weekly listeners. My name is Nicolaas van Wyk, and I'm going to be your host for this session of Accounting Weekly podcasts. I am also the CEO of the Chartered Institute for Business Accountants and the editor for Accounting Weekly. Today, my guest is Jean Claude Marais. He's a partner at Marais and Mutasa, and also a well-known and experienced accounting and tax practitioner. And he recently developed, well, not recently, he's got lots of experience in business advisory. And I was particularly interested. I'm following John on LinkedIn, and he sometimes posts very interesting things, and I can see what he's busy with. So I decided to interview him for Accounting Weekly so that he can share with us his journey as a accountant, tax practitioner, and of late moving into business advisory services. We'll be discussing his career progress, also the SARS' efforts to collect more and more taxes from taxpayers and the role that tax practitioners should play. And at the end, we'll touch on this new tender that SARS has issued, asking whether tax consultants want to come and work, well, I suppose not as employees of SARS, but more like agents for SARS, and even being able to issue assessments, and don't know whether they'll also do the collections. No, imagine that, tax consultants, tax practitioners acting on both sides of the fence. So that's going to be an interesting discussion. From CIBA, we started in 1987. We've been involved with the accounting profession for many, many years, a recognized controlling body with SARS, and also our members are eligible to perform independent review engagements, business rescue, acting as business rescue practitioners, and a whole host of other things that statutes require entities to perform, whether it's preparing financial statements or issuing reports on financial statements or assisting clients with doing tax work. South Africa's legislation requires that if you want to do those services, you should be a member of a professional body. And then we entrusted with monitoring the tax, the conduct of accountants and tax practitioners, and also to support them with technical supports and such, of which one element is Accounting Weekly. So let's move on then to our guest, Jean Claude. Thank you very much for joining us. And John, would you just not take us through your career progression up until this point?
Yes, thank you, Nicolaas. Thank you for having me, and thank you for the listeners that's tuning in. So from our side, my career has been quite a journey. The original idea was, to do the traditional route, go to your articles, become an FM, and work your way out. That was the initial plan. And during that time, I actually find out that there's various elements to the whole industry, to the whole field. It's not as straightforward as we thought. Even though there's a traditional route, there are some specialities that you can go in and you can develop and take it further. So I started at PKF. Had a long journey with PKF as well, working under some very prominent auditors and accountants and tax professionals, and that kind of helped me to develop a certain set of skills and ambitions into the various fields. And you don't really get exposed to that when you start your own firm, or when you work for one of the smaller firms, the general accountants, doing all the compliance type of work. I think I was very fortunate to be exposed to a higher level of like you said, business rescue, and tax consulting and auditing and forensic work. So I think that really opened some doors for me. And after that, I basically tried to develop a set of skills that is a niche market that's not offered primarily by accountants, in order to assist the SME market that might not be able to afford the services of not even Big Four, but even some of the top 20 firms. That they're usually the firms that offer these sort of services. And they also have various billing structures to meet their expenses with IRBA and various regulatory bodies. So it's very difficult for SME clients to get hold of those services. And what we found is that there's actually a need in the market for these types of services, but it's just not accessible to the accountants as well as to the taxpayer. So my idea was to formulate structure where these sort of services is accessible to to even micro entities as well that might need these services. And that's kind of where we're going with this. This is why we developed a core set of skills and services that we can offer to more the SME market, and especially to other accountants and lawyers and consultants, that they can have access to these sort of things. What we found was a lot of accountants advise the client that there's not really something we can do about it, because it is in the SME realm, and to pay fees for someone to take this on is quite extensive, which is not always true when we due to our structure that we set up. It's now accessible to anybody. It's not just for the high net worth individuals or the large corporations.
Thank you for that overview. Yeah, I think working with a PKF and doing your articles there and being exposed to like a mid-tier type of firm, I think that is the best route if there are students listening and you are interested in a career in accounting. Like John has said, it's quite varied. We have seen of late students not choosing to do a BCom and enter the profession. They say there's too much compliance, and it's you have to study many years, and then you have to work at a very lowly fee. But that is just true for one part of the profession, and more specifically the auditing profession. And unfortunately, that has dominated our profession, and also at university level, that's kind of the dominant theme. But there's many routes to becoming an accountant. Some people enter the profession without even a commerce background and then focus on a particular area. Others specialize to a very high extent, and others are even becoming attorneys and combining that with becoming an accountant. And then, as John has said, there's so many things that you can do, and getting your articles from a PKF firm gives you a real all-round approach. An article clerk, you get this exposure. You might work a little longer with that firm, becoming like a practice manager and overseeing others. And then eventually you start your own firm, I suppose, still in more basic stuff. How do you make that jump, and how do you discover that? What was your journey? If somebody are interested in adding that to their firms, I think just sharing what is business advisory and the journey that took you there.
Yes. So when we talk about advisory, it's a very broad spectrum. It kind of covers a lot of bases that we get into. Some advisory might be more into the management consulting realm. That's just advising on operations, internal controls, that sort of thing. We also advise on, apart from our forensic work, we advise on fraud avoidance. So what sort of internal control procedures we need to put in. And this all comes down to my exposure to the auditing profession, which, again, I'm not extensively in audit like a registered auditor, but what was nice is the basics you can take from there, and you can kind of develop it and study on it and read on it and see what sort of internal controls would be best to place at certain aspects of the company. It takes a lot of research, reading into cases, reading into the Medtronic case, reading into even as far back as the Enron cases, as to what happened, why did it happen, and how you can avoid it. And it gets quite interesting to read on it, and you learn by reading on that sort of thing. I think a lot of the advisory portion, I would say about 20% is theory that you study at varsity, maybe some honors and master's work if you get to that sort of extent and that size of client. But 80% of it is self-study, reading, trying to understand what happened previously and how we can avoid it in the future. I think most of our profession is built on that sort of principle. So if as a student or as a professional trying to develop, I think a lot of the things come from, reading into these cases, spending a lot of time researching and developing yourself. There's quite a good CPD as well that you can kind of nitpick on and try to use that as well. I think it is still very limited on the CPD front. Same with short courses. It's a very limited resource pool in formal education, unless you go and specialize in a master's degree or something of that sort. But for a general practitioner to evolve, I would suggest definitely taking the time, read the Tax Administration Act. I think that's a lot of things that we do that the normal tax practitioners, especially the accounting tax practitioners, don't do. is they're very much based on the practical side, the number side. And what we found with the lawyers dealing in taxes that are also tax practitioners, they focus more on the legal side, and they don't really understand how the figures come to match up with the legal side of things. So I would advise a lot of accountants to actually go in, go get the Tax Administration Act if you have a LexisNexis subscription, or even if it's free to download off of the internet as well. Just have a read through it, and you'll find there's a lot of interesting things that we don't really understand or do in practices, especially in accountants, and that's affecting a lot of people, a lot of practices at this stage, with SARS upping their game, especially on the compliance side. I mean, they're really delving into the Tax Administration Act. They're actually quoting the act as they start issuing assessments and that sort of thing. So I think that was a big part of my journey. Obviously, I started in audit. I switched over to corporate finance eventually, corporate finance with tax. I did a lot of financial management type of work, a lot more geared towards management accounting and that sort of thing, due diligences, reporting, especially with listings on the JSE, and also did a bit of work on the London Stock Exchange and the New York Stock Exchange. Obviously, thanks to PKF giving me that sort of exposure. And as I was doing the work, I like to delve into topics in my free time. So if I saw something that happened with a client, or that I found in the file, either from another colleague of mine that did it, I kind of like to read up on that and go from there. My journey is definitely not traditional. I didn't go full-time varsity. I didn't have a formal BCom degree. I have what is called an advanced diploma. It used to be a BTech, specifically in management accounting, and that's kind of how I built my relationship with the industry. Is I try to learn as much as possible, diversify myself, and gain as much as I can, not just through formal learning, but also through informal learning. And at the point where I'm now, where my academic journey is now delving into postgraduate studies on master's levels and that sort of thing. And this is for someone that doesn't have a formal BCom degree. I kind of work my way through everything on a very unconventional point of view. But I didn't want to be stuck just doing auditing, or just doing accounting, or just doing tax. I wanted to learn as much, go past departments, try to absorb as much as I possibly can through articles. And then when I started my own firm, offering bookkeeping services, accounting services, eventually it was independent review services. It kind of, you get stuck into this, the sticky situation where your revenue, especially if you work on a retainer basis, it kind of limits you of what you can do further, because you are very much involved in doing those compliance work, and you kind of limit your time doing other things. And I think that's where the story starts with Marais and Mutasa, is both me and Stanford, which is the other partner and the managing partner of the firm. We both were stuck, and we had certain skill sets that we were basically collaborating with each other as two separate entities, and we decided to do the merger and combine that, where my focus is more on the advisory side, and his focus is more on the compliance side, with obvious help with the tax stuff on the tax cases. So that it was quite a journey. I moved around departments. I moved around, doing a whole bunch of qualifications, doing a whole bunch of diplomas, financial accounting, technical financial accounting, advanced diploma in management accounting. I tried to diversify as much as possible. And now the plans forward is obviously to do a postgrad in taxation specifically. And by combining all of those, those skill sets that I gathered, whether it be auditing or corporate finance or consulting, that kind of build a model for me to be able to understand anything from what the accountant does for the client, to what the tax consultant does, to what the lawyer does. Not that I did a lot of law work, but I work closely with lawyers, especially in the corporate finance realm. So I kind of got to understand what they do. I also work closely with other tax lawyers as well. So it's quite synergy, and I try to absorb as much as possible. So I think the key takeaway that I can give is, as much as the formal education is a benefit, and it's definitely a necessity, the majority of what you will learn comes from articles. It plays a very big role in development. I do see a big difference between someone that did articles versus didn't do articles. there's like a big gap in not the theory part, but in the how the systems work, how all of that work in practice. And then obviously the biggest component is self-study. You need to take the time to read through the acts. If you're dealing with tax, take time to read through cases. When you're dealing with any sort of advisory, try to gain as much as you can. What I also like to do, which is a big thing for me, is I like to read annual reports of companies. So you can really absorb a lot of information coming from the CFOs of listed entities when they do their CFO report in the integrated reporting part. A specific one I like to read is the Berkshire Hathaway one. It is now American based, but there's a lot of information in that small part that they write from the directors, that you can really absorb a lot of information, and you can kind of translate that to your clients when you're dealing with an advisory role, how to advise on a strategic approach, that sort of thing. And what I would also advise a lot of students, if you do a BCom in financial accounting, is to definitely try to get into the CIBA course for the advanced diploma for management accounting, especially the management case study and the strategic case study. That deals a lot less with accounting and a lot more with advisory work. It's a very little section that they deal with accounting, but that also is invaluable for anybody that wants to add on to their BCom and onto their CIBA designations. You don't necessarily have to get the CIBA designation, but just to go do that advanced diploma, it really is of benefit. And that was my approach. My approach was to try to absorb as much as I can in the early part of my career. I tried not to listen to the noise of, you need to go and register at CIBA, you need to go and do the Airbus stuff. I tried to kind of not go that route and try to explore as much bodies as possible, as much avenues that you can learn from as possible. And I think that really shaped my career. And apart from being at BKF and doing the formal studies, that really did make a big difference to me, is to try and absorb as much from different departments and bodies and resources that's available.
Yeah, what I hear you saying is that if you decide to enter a profession, you need to be interested in that profession, and you need to be interested in your clients and their problems. Like you said, you're doing constant research, and you're just interested in things. And then because you become an expert in it, and others wants to pay you to share that knowledge with them. So I hear what you're saying. It's also a good way, I suppose, to set up your practice with a compliance side and a business advisory side. What I do find is some small businesses don't fully appreciate the work of their bookkeepers or their accountants, and they just see them as they have to file the tax return. And then you get unscrupulous tax practitioners that play into this, and then obviously say no, but they'll help them save taxes, and then they get them all on the wrong pathway. But it's a necessary cost to have an accountant, not only in the sense of compliance, but to make your business better. And then there's all these things that you need to add as a businessman. So I'm obviously speaking biased, I suppose, from the profession itself, but I think we need to position ourselves better, and you've done that properly now with your explanation, the value that you can add. And I think it's also now clear for people the pathway to follow. But let's move on to another area of your advisory services, and that's assisting clients with their tax issues. That's not the tax return per se, but if you submit a tax return and you're claiming a refund, whether you're a sole proprietor or a big company, whether it's a VAT return or just an income tax return, then you might get this letter from SARS, or you will, for a verification letter. And they start querying you on your documentation. And they might even ask you to provide them with all the information, with all your receipts and invoices and journal entries and contracts that you've signed and meeting of minutes, board agendas. And then they scrutinize this. I always wonder how much cost SARS actually invests in. Basically, you have to kind of redo your whole life in paper. I even once thought that I must just get a GoPro, put it on my shoulder, and record everything I do. And then if SARS comes and asks for verification, I just send them this thing, because they want to kind of relive everything that you did. It's really excruciating, and that's a huge cost for business. And then if you pass this verification, all good, you get your refund. If not, they might even then escalate this to a full-blown audit, and then you start meeting the different sides of SARS, where they actually think everybody's a crook and they have to come and catch you. I once heard about this case. It's just quite funny, actually comical, if not ironic. The taxpayer was hit with a 200% penalty because there was this amount of money in his bank account that wasn't declared, and upon investigation, it was like a discovery refund of 10 rand or something, or a checkers refund that was received because of good conduct or whatever. Or somebody might repay you for a golf game that you've played with them, and maybe you've paid, and they said, no, I'll refund you. And then there's an income. Well, at least in SARS's mind. So sometimes, especially at that level, SARS is like they have a hammer and now everything looks like a nail. I suppose if you stand on SARS's side, you might appreciate that because they're obviously subject to a lot of VAT fraud, and there are hugely complex and big syndicates attacking SARS, so it's difficult. How do you distinguish the two? But give us a little bit of an insight in your work in that audit side of SARS. And I think there's many things. They're not only managing a tax debt, doing compromises with SARS. Just explain that to us, your journey into this area, and whether you would recommend it for other accountants to also enter this sometimes, I suppose, risky area of managing taxes.
Yes, definitely. So this is something that actually surfaced a lot in the past year about, where we found that SARS is really coming down on not only taxpayers but on tax practitioners. They are getting very strict on what they looking for and what they submitted, and this is a big portion of our tax department is dealing with either an assessment that got raised by SARS, or an audit that can't, that the accountant can't get over the line. They don't know what to do anymore. They've submitted everything, and SARS just keeps rejecting it. And the reasons that they give is either, well, it's one or two things. Either it doesn't explain anything to the tax practitioner. I mean, I've seen a letter where the auditor or the verification consultant is asking for information down below, but down below there's nothing. So it's either that sort of problem, or it's a problem where they are referencing the Income Tax Act to such an extent that it took me to actually go reread what happened there. So you either get one of the two, and both are equally troublesome for the accountant. And so what we tend to do is most of the work that's not our own clients that we deal with compliance with, it's referrals from other accountants that come through to us, where it's either mostly it's a VAT problem. It's very rarely that we get income tax problems, unless it's an assessed loss type of situation where if the tax practitioner disclosed to SARS in 1 year that there's no income and they have an assessed loss that came forward, SARS has the right to then abandon that assessed loss because it ceased trading. So in theory, that assessed loss should then be written off. So that's one thing that we find popping up. But most of the work is in VAT, where VAT 217s are issued, and they just disallow all expenses, and the onus of proof is on the taxpayer or the tax practitioner to prove that input is valid before they can actually rework the input and correct the return, which is quite troublesome. If you can think, if you have a client and all of a sudden SARS is emailing them and say you owe me basically all the output that was submitted, and that can get quite painful for tax practitioners. And what we found was how we solved this problem is we had a relook of the objections and the appeals that all the theory behind it. And there's a good book that I'll also mention to the listeners later that they can definitely read, which explains the entire process, the technicality behind it. Because what we saw happening was previously when you had some reasonable evidence you submitted to SARS, whether later explaining what happened, it was quite easy to get the verification sorted, get the audit sorted, or even the objection passed. And we found that is no longer the case. SARS wants you to give them substantial evidence and also point out, what it relates to, what section it relates to. You basically need to build a case to just, get that audit or verification through. And we see a lot of tax practitioners are struggling with that sort of thing. So our approach is very simple. When we get a referral through to us, we look at the case, and in the beginning it was quite difficult, because what we would ask for the accountant is to send us everything. Send us the general ledger, send us the detailed VAT report, and what we'll do is we'll go through that and we will request invoices. And the difficulty we faced was the accountants would come back and say, no, but this is, it's just 5. Usually SARS ask for 5 invoices. Why are you asking for 25 or 30? And what we're doing is we're trying to build the case. We're trying to tell the story. We want to let SARS understand what the company does, what is the operations, why are we claiming this, how it all fits into the puzzle. So we kind of build what we call a case file. So it takes a bit of time. We basically go through everything from start. We get letters of the taxpayer to explain the nature of business, what they do, who's their main suppliers, why are these suppliers there, what do they pay them for, who's the customers, just give a general sense of the business. And we kind of build the case from there. We take the output VAT and we kind of draw a map for SARS. We reference a traditional auditing style referencing. We actually do still print out everything. It just works easier, but you can do it digitally if you want to, obviously. But for me, it works better to print it out. I take a red pen and I reference everything. I cross-reference it. Back to the VAT detailed report. And then I obviously attach a letter, which is quite extensive, about 2-3 pages, where I explain everything that we've gathered, all the evidence we've gathered. I explain it into the letter, and in that letter, SARS will also find if I mention something, mention a specific invoice, maybe it was a capital expenditure invoice, I would reference that in a certain way, which I also add to the letter, where the auditor can easily find that piece of supporting evidence. And we've had quite a bit of success doing that. We've helped a lot of tax practitioners getting the audit sorted, the verification sorted, or even an objection or an appeal sorted by doing that sort of thing. We've had cases where the taxpayer has been with 3 different accountants, 3 different auditing firms, and each time it's disallowed by SARS, and then we take on the client. We ask for a lot more information than what the previous accountants would ask for, and I think the key, the golden egg, is in the way that we reference and the way that we tell the story. At the end of the day, that gets it through. We've had quite a bit of success with that sort of cases where it was even late. We had to give grounds of late submissions and all of that sort of thing, and we got it across the line. So I think what SARS wants to see is they kind of treating all the taxpayers as hostile for now, and they kind of want you to prove that that's not the case. And I think what they want to see is they want to see someone that has all their ducks in a row, that has all the paperwork there, everything is ready to go. And they kind of start getting suspicious when the tax practitioner submits something and either the VAT number is not there, or there's small mistakes, even a mistake on a figure or on a number. And then the taxpayer says, no, the tax practitioner says, no, sorry, there was a mistake. Here's the new documents. That kind of gives a sense of, a lack of trust between the auditor and the tax practitioner. Are these documents really true? Why are they editing, now? And I think that causes a lot of problems for tax practitioners as well. So what we try to do for our own clients that's not referral clients is we try to keep our files as neat as possible. We try to keep all the evidence. We try to reference it beforehand, that if SARS were to query something, it's a matter of just submitting it, because also a delay in submitting also kind of causes a bit of mistrust from the tax from SARS, especially when you go over the allowed period that they do allow you. So they do allow you a period, which is quite reasonable. But if you go over that period and then you try to submit everything, it kind of, they question a lot more, and it kind of, from a verification point of view, it will turn into an audit, most definitely turn into an audit. And I think that's the key element that I think we are missing as tax practitioners is we kind of having this, we've gotten into this motion that, if SARS asks for something, just submit, a few documents, do a letter, and it will be fine, where that's no longer the case. I think definitely something that needs to be developed is the way that we communicate with SARS. And especially when you get to an objection and appeal phase, past the audit phase, you kind of switch from an accounting role to a legal role, because a notice of appeal is actually a legal motion against SARS. It's not an accounting function per se. It's more from a legal point of view. So you kind of need to change your mindset from, I'm the accountant, this is the figures, SARS just needs to believe my calculations because I'm an accountant, where you kind of need to go into a bit of more legal terminology and try to, what I usually say to our trainees is, think like a lawyer, word it like a lawyer, talk to SARS as if you are, defending your client, which is essentially what you're doing when you're lodging an objection. And you kind of need to have all of those sort of things. You can't just send them a TB or a detailed ledger for an objection. That's not the point. You need to kind of explain why you think SARS's interpretation of a certain aspect of the act is incorrect and why yours is correct. That's the point of an objection or an appeal. And you won't get far if you don't start understanding and utilizing those tools that we have available to us. From an auditing point of view, that is it's very much accounting wise. But what I see is a lack of tax practitioner willingness to actually submit and go the extra mile to just make sure everything is ready and SARS can understand what's going on. It's not just some Excel schedule with a few invoices.
Yeah, that's I can see why your services will be so in high demand with general tax practitioners. I don't think not everybody has this ability to reword it or look at stuff like a lawyer would, and also that obviously takes years of experience. Given that SARS is now much more focused on tax collection and looking for ways to decline, I think that's also maybe a misconception with the general public. SARS doesn't really favor providing for deductions. I think they're looking for reasons not to allow the deduction, even if it's in the act. So, how can you set up your accounting tax practice to kind of make it ready for these eventualities that will come? Many times an accountant would not provide for those risks in his fees, so they will just do the basic compliance stuff, and when the audit comes, then the client doesn't want to pay for that because they view it as some mistake that you made. So I suppose there's some management of a client necessary, just to inform them that this will happen. What's your views on this?
Yes, so that is a big issue, is especially managing the client relationship while going through this process. We need to understand that this is a very emotional situation for a client to be in as well. They get demand letters and they get all these sorts of things, or they might even get a court order where assets will be attached and that sort of thing, and these things happen on a daily basis. SARS is not just sending final demands anymore; they are actually actioning those final demands. So I think that's the key thing, is to manage the client relationship and manage the client expectations. Well, what I would suggest most accountants do to obviously gear towards that sort of provision is to let clients know that when we do an audit, when we do a verification, it is part of the compliance process with SARS. Getting selected for an audit does not mean something was incorrect. It just means that you have been selected to supply supporting evidence for this particular return that we submitted. And what we like to do is we like to also actively engage on social media and with our clients on developments on SARS. When we speak to our clients, we tell them, SARS is very much more active on VAT. We need to make sure we have all the documents correct. It might damage your tax compliance status, all of that sort of thing, if we don't have all these processes in place. And to let the client understand, and I think this is something we lacked in the beginning as well, is we never informed the client of how SARS works and what the timeframes are. What is a verification? What does it mean? So I think this boils down to educating your client as well. Not to an extent to be a tax practitioner, but just to understand what everything means. Because when a client sees a letter, they automatically go into defensive mode, and it's always the accountant. Why did you not submit something? Did you do something wrong? And if they understand what the whole process is, I think they would better understand what's happening at this point in time. Explain to them, this is the verification. This is why they're doing the verification. We need to submit this sort of supporting documents. The issue with fees is something that's quite prevalent. I think that's also an industry issue, that all accountants try to be cheaper than the other, to gain more quantity of work rather than quality of work. And I mean, this we've been seeing for years now, where this kind of went into, accountants started to try to be more of a machine, turning out financials, turning out returns, with limited to no quality. It's more about, getting it done, getting it submitted, rather than, taking the time to think what we're doing, how are we doing it, will this pass? If you put yourselves in the shoes of the auditor, if you were to receive whatever you are producing, will you, as on the other side of the table, would you actually look into this further, or allow it to go through? And I think the problem that most tax practitioners face is fees. They can't really spend hours on doing the audit when they have a retainer, and they didn't really account for that. So my suggestion is definitely to make sure that you account for that sort of unforeseen circumstances in your fee structure. Especially with a retainer, it's most likely that you'll need to build in additional annual fees to cover that sort of unforeseen expenses. Yeah, I think that's one thing, and also the organization of accountants as well, which we found lacking quite a bit. Even from our side in the beginning, you have some sort of filing system, but it's not really there. You're kind of just trying to get all the work done. I would say definitely invest as soon as possible in digital and hard copy files if you need hard copy files, but definitely a digital filing system, some sort of way to keep track of everything. We obviously use the full Microsoft suite, so we invested quite heavily into Microsoft. So we utilize a lot of the programs, not just your basic Word and Excel. We utilize a lot of the different functions that it gives us, planner boards and lists for tax compliance control, that sort of thing. And that's definitely something to invest in. We didn't make provision for that at all on our fees, but it's something we decided to invest in just to make our work easier and lighten the burden that we face with SARS and with all sort of regulatory bodies, whether it be the FSCA or whatever the case is. And I think once you get into that groove of doing it on a constant basis, you'll have everything ready despite requests from SARS or CIBC or any regulatory body. And it also helps with when you do independent reviews, if you were to have to submit that anywhere, that your files are in order and everything is there.
That's very true. No, thank that was quite comprehensive explanation. I think it's an interesting area of our accounting firms, and something that can be lucrative if you manage it properly with clients. I can definitely see like a two-tiered pricing structure where clients pay this retainer, but maybe an additional one for these unforeseen things, and then it's done per month and they don't have to worry about it, but it has to be managed. Also from an SME side, I think many SMEs sometimes go under just because they underestimated the compliance that they have to go through. And because that fee that you charge your clients as an SME has to consist of a few things. The first, I suppose, is your own operational cost that has to be covered. Then you have to add a compliance cost plus these unforeseen costs. And then you also have to add a risk premium because not a supplier may stop trading, or there's some unforeseen thing that will happen, which requires that your pricing is increased. So yeah, maybe SMEs need that guidance also. But let's move on to the last topic that I wanted to discuss with you, and that is SARS recently opened up. I think it was like a tender, maybe that's the wrong word, where they said that they want to beef up tax compliance and their own knowledge base. They're asking tax consultants to come and deploy their services within SARS. I read briefly through those tender documents that you can submit, and it does raise a number of issues, chief amongst which I suppose is conflict of interest. So you've built up the successful practice, and listening to you have intricate knowledge of clients and their affairs, and you're also interested in regulating them and getting them compliant with SARS. So there's various means in which you would do that. So if somebody comes to you, a client, haven't been paying taxes for the last number of years, or structured transactions incorrectly, and now says, look, I want to open up my affairs, then there's processes that a tax practitioner would follow. engaging with SARS on VDR payment arrangements and preparing all the financials as they should be, and then submitting them, and there you go. No, so then you saved the business, you made it compliant, and SARS is assured of continuous taxes because the business is now properly regulated. But now that gives you, as a tax consultant, certain information about the profession and about SMEs and such. And then now SARS is saying, now come utilize that information, assist us in identifying businesses, and assist us with doing these assessments and utilizing, in other words, the knowledge that you've gained from those very same SMEs. Now, the tender does say that you can't do this working on SARS side for your own clients and targeting them, but why wouldn't you then? You could. I'm not saying they would, and I'm obviously playing devil's advocate, but I was thinking about all the scenarios. If a person would now to jump ship and cross the line over to SARS, not as an employee, but as a tax consultant, it's a nice way to eliminate competition. You can identify all the bad apples from your competitors, start targeting them, and then obviously expose them and get complaints laid with professional bodies. I'm not saying that's the idea and that they would do, but yeah, we're all humans, and humans must have a dark side as well. And then, but I suppose more importantly is that pledge that we make now as tax practitioners, because and sometimes I think the objectives are blurred. For whose benefit are we acting? No, we act for the benefit of taxpayers. That's why we study, and that's why I get experience. So to help taxpayers manage their tax affairs. No, we're not employed by SARS. We don't work for them. They're a stakeholder in our industry because they have to administer tax laws, but we're not acting for their benefit. No, we're acting for the benefit of clients that wants to operate in a legal and proper and fair way. So I do seem to think that it's just unholy. Now, if you're a tax consultant moving over to SARS, it doesn't sound right, because there's other ways that you can improve the tax base, and that is taking tax consultants their role seriously, getting them to properly advise their clients and properly pay their taxes. I'm not saying there are not tax consultants giving bad advice to clients and assisting them in defrauding the fiscus. Obviously, that is abhorrent and shouldn't be condoned. That can't be condoned. But now, this new method of getting tax consultants to work both sides of the line does pose some problems. What is your view on the matter when you saw that the first time? Just your thoughts.
Yes, it was definitely something interesting, and I'd never expected it to become a reality in the tax field. My major concern is definitely the conflict of interest. Usually what would happen is the reverse would happen. I mean, if you look at some of the more older partners in our field, especially with some of the bigger firms, they all were SARS consultants or worked for SARS, in return for the military service and that sort of thing. And then they would become very proficient tax consultants because they understand the system, they know how it works. And now we're kind of doing the reverse. And I think why we're doing the reverse is not because of the system itself. Is from what I can see is, the public practice, the tax practitioners in practice are running circles around the SARS consultants when it comes to financial statements, all of those technical accounting skills. And I think what's happening now is, I think they really can't pinpoint where stuff is going wrong and why only years later that they kind of realize that this was fraudulent, and then there's a whole case and that sort of thing. So I agree with SARS's sentiment of what they're trying to achieve is stop it before it actually gets to a point where it's basically too late. However, digging into public practice might not be the best approach, especially on a tender basis, because now you're sitting with someone that's in public practice, but they're also representing SARS they're playing two roles, which is definitely not just a problem for the profession in terms of conflict of interest, trust between tax practitioners, and if you're on an accounting group or anything like that, it's kind of now, severing the relationship between professionals, because you never know, is this guy one of the, what one of the guys said to me as a spy, is one of the guys a spy for SARS, trying to see if one of my clients are, maybe not tax compliant, and they're trying to, dig into that. So it kind of causes that sort of conflict. What I would think would be a better approach for SARS is to, open up job positions for someone that, if you want to work for SARS and that's your passion, then, you are a full-time employee of SARS, and they need to start, maybe offering jobs to, specifically for people that did articles that maybe they're a qualified accountant, they're part of a professional body. That would seem to me to be a better approach. Cut the ties with public practice and come work for us. Because one of the bigger risks as well that they face is, now you have someone access to SARS systems and access to public practice. That in itself would be, for me, it would be a big risk. And that's kind of like, giving, if that tax practitioner had, bad intentions, that's kind of like giving the keys to your car to a thief. That's, having a guy that, steals cars working at a car wash, where you give the keys of the car to the person. It also opens up a big risk profile for SARS for misuse of this tender. In terms of what we can see, I mean, it just opens up a lot of corruption between the people that is going to get the tender, and also other practitioners that might want to, have some sort of coalition going there, where it might benefit people that are related to this tax practitioner that's now consulting for SARS. So I think there's a lot of risk that hasn't gone, hasn't been investigated by SARS before doing the tender.
It's fraught with danger. I think chief for me is the trust taxpayers place in their consultants. Right? Being able to know that there's somebody that you can go and talk to help me regularize my affairs. Right? Now,
yes.
if you take that trust, and the whole profession is built on trust, and if you take that trust away, then why would taxpayers trust tax practitioners? And therefore it attacks the whole basis of which we've built the profession. And then also might cause less people to want to come forward and legalize their affairs, right? Because they don't know what they're going to get on the side. The other serious matter to me is, what if one of those, many of them, tax practitioners that decides to become tax consultants now with SARS, surely they should then make a declaration before they do, saying, listen, I've never ever made any bad advice to a client. I never developed a tax scheme. And surely the SARS should first investigate that practice to make sure that there's nothing untoward within that person's practice. Because imagine the embarrassment if one of the clients being investigated, not by that person himself, but one of his colleagues now, or working now on SARS side, somebody else, investigate that client. And then it transpires that the person now being a consultant for SARS is actually one of the ones that gave this bad structures and opinions. Now, how will they deal with that? It's kind of impossible. And the third one is secret information. Many businesses make their money because they have secret formulas or secret methods, or they have a cost structure from which they buy from suppliers. Now, imagine if you're a tax consultant, you go on the SARS side, and you see all these things. You open up an assessment and you ask all these contracts and formulas and things. Imagine after that engagement, how well you'll be able to advise the competitors of that entity that you've assessed and investigated. It's kind of lucrative affair. So I don't know how they're going to manage that conflict. Just your final thoughts before we close the podcast.
Yeah, no, that's definitely one of the key risks is it comes down to conflict from both sides, and how they will manage this tax consultant working for them not to because obviously you will be exposed to a whole bunch of information, and you will still have clients that you will need to obviously service, and like you said, it might be a competitor of one of the taxpayers that you are busy auditing, and that sort of information. I think they can maybe try to have NDAs in place and some sort of confidentiality agreements and that sort of thing. But if at the end of the day, if someone is going to be unethical, I don't think an NDA would stop them. And I think, dealing with the corruption in South Africa in general, opening a tender with this broad spectrum and various risk elements, I do not think it's a good idea for South Africa in general. I think it's open to a bunch of corruption that will take place. And misuse of the information, misuse of the function that you play at SARS as a tax consultant. I just don't think that would really, and it comes down to as well as, privilege in the tax industry. There's actually no privilege that we have, in a legal case, but there's still that trust, the trust that, that those information, you will as a tax consultant handle it with sensitivity when going to SARS with a VDP, or even if you go to a non-admissible meeting with SARS, you will still inform SARS of the information, but you will do it in a correct manner to protect your client. Where I think that whole structure that we've built as tax consultants will start to crumble when this tender takes place. It would be very problematic for anybody to trust tax consultants, and also tax consultants to trust each other. And I don't know how they will deal with that sort of conflict, especially working on both sides of the table. It really raises a lot of questions that I think they will first need to answer to the public and to the profession in general before they can actually issue this and go forward. Like I said, I think from my personal opinion, the best approach SARS can have is to actually give employment with certain skill sets that they want, rather than outsourcing it in a tender manner.
I had a discussion with a colleague of mine about how the attorneys do it, because sometimes the National Prosecuting Authority will engage with attorneys, and private attorneys, to assist them with cases. But the big difference is there is one, attorneys have an Attorneys Act. Attorneys have legal privilege. So there's certain protection mechanisms built into that relationship. And then secondly, the attorneys start assisting once the NPA has already identified a case of criminality. And then they just assist them on parts of the thing, investigating. In the tax practitioner scenario that we're talking about, it's kind of, it's not a particular case being investigated. It's very broadly. It seems to me just taxpayers in general. Maybe they're involved in specific types of transactions, but there's no underlying criminality per se identified before you start. So it's just, it just doesn't sound right. But John, on I don't know whether that's a low or a high note. It's an interesting note. We're going to end our podcast. It's been very nice speaking with you. Thank you very much for being so frank in your discussion. I think we need more of these types of frank discussions, because we're building the profession, and it doesn't help us just dancing around matters. No, it has to be addressed and improved. And yeah, thank you for being sharing your personal experience and viewpoints so frankly. I really enjoyed it. Just a last word from you, and then we'll close the podcast.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you very much for the opportunity. It's always nice to talk about what interests me. It gets quite difficult, if you have this sort of niche market and trying to extend it, and then also you share your knowledge and that sort of thing. Once again, I mentioned that I will mention a good book that I really liked. I enjoyed reading it. It's very technical. It goes into extreme detail on disputes with SARS. It's written by Nicolaas van Wyk, a very prominent tax practitioner, very active on social media as well. And it's called A Practical Guide to Handling Tax Disputes. It's a LexisNexis published book. I know he has it on his website as well. I bought it for myself and for my team, and it really, if you're looking at detailed explanations, this is definitely the book to have. It is limited. It doesn't include Section 200 compromises and that sort of thing, but it's definitely something to have and to have a read through, especially if you have clients that you're dealing with a lot of objection and appeals. If you just want to sharpen up your knowledge, this is a very good book that I have, and I use it on a daily basis.
All right. Thank you, John, for that book review. I'm sure it will help members, and I also can recommend getting it. And then that concludes our podcast.
Thank you very much.
What do our defining moments look like? Just like this moment right now. They look like pride after achieving that long sought-after goal. All the small victories along the way that didn't feel momentous until we saw them in the rearview mirror. They look like the courage it takes to take that first big step. All the times we fail and rise again. And without even knowing it, cultivating an inner strength that is contagious along the way. They look like the inspiration that comes from knowing that we are not alone. They look like the human relationships that give us wisdom beyond what data ever could. They look like the curiosity that comes from exploring, that allow us to create and contribute. They look like education that unlocks our full potential, using our knowledge for impact. They look like choosing our own definition of success, over hiding, over hustling, over pretending. They look like others showing up and recognizing our efforts after all the times we already showed up for ourselves. They look like being bold enough to be extraordinary. They look like you. Right now, right here. First, we help you see your defining moments. Then we help you seize them. We are the accounting body for everyone. We are the accounting body for you.